Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Herald podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW, or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information@CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcasts and give us any constructive feedback.
This is the Herald on Wednesday the 18th of January 2023. News. CMAL. Design gaps with fiasco ferries, significant risk to delivery. This article is by Martin Williams. The Scottish Government-controlled owner of the nation's ferries has indicated that continuing gaps in the design of the nation's ferry fiasco vessels is providing a significant risk to their delivery. CMAL, Caledonian Maritime Assets Limited, the taxpayer-funded company which owns and procures ferries, raised concerns in its latest analysis of progress of the construction of 2 lifeline ferries, which remain languishing at the nationalised Ferguson Marine Shipyard in Inverclyde. Glensannox and Hull 802 were due online in the first half of 2018, when Ferguson Marine was under the control of tycoon Jim McCall, with one initially to serve Arran and the other to serve the Skye Triangle routes to North Uist and Harris, but they are at least 5 years late, with costs soaring from £97 million to nearly £350 million. Both the shipyard and CMAL are still looking for delivery of Glensannox between March and May this year. Ferguson Marine has advised CMAL that there will be further delay to the completion of Hull 802, which was scheduled to be set sail sometime between October and December 2023 and be operationally ready at the start of next year. It said the overall programme for Hull 802 is now under review, with installation of pipework behind schedule. But in a delayed update on progress, CMAL has warned ongoing design changes affecting the constructability of the vessel's design are driven exclusively within the shipyard process to meet regulatory and contracted specification requirements and are not driven by CMAL's request for change. All the related to outstanding technical queries and previously unidentified works. Closure of final design gaps is needed, which at this late stage of the project remains a significant risk to the project. According to a past risk assessment, a highest level alert highlighted by Ferguson Marine to the project included concerns of late changes due to design errors. It said these errors may be mistake, misscope or non-conformances to requirements /spec. The collapse of the Mr McCall-led Ferguson Marine, which operates the last remaining shipyard on the Lower Clyde, in August 2019, came amid soaring costs and delays and resulted in a Scottish Government-pursued nationalisation. It came 5 years after the tycoon first rescued the yard when it went bust. Mr McCall wants an independent, judge-led inquiry into the fiasco, blamed the rising costs on repeated design changes by CMAL, the owners and procurers of Scotland's ferry fleet. This has been denied by CMAL. One ferry user group official said the continuing issues with the ferries was a bit of a disaster. We do not know if and when these vessels will ever be accepted. You would have thought that after all this time, issues with design would have been dealt with, when we know these were to be key to the downturn when Jim McCall was in charge of the yard. The whole sorry tale is farcical. Some yard workers raised concerns the vessels will never be considered fit to take to the seas, while new problems over their delivery emerge. The latest CMAL progress report for August reveals that a key equipment supplier advised that the main engine and generator turbocharges require upgrade works, which meant that commissioning dates for the first run of its main propulsion was put back by at least 2 months. It says that the performance of the electrical contractor remains a concern and is being closely monitored by the shipyard's senior management and CMAL following delays in dealing with problem cables. A recovery plan was put in place after there was a slippage in pipework installation and electrical installation and other commissioning programmes. Key challenges to the development of the ferries have included the installation of ship cables, found to be too short to reach equipment, and issues with pipework. CMAL had previously raised concerns that no consideration was being given to the main body of cable installation that extended ship-wide, totalling 125 miles. Completion rate of cables was put at 38% against a target of 93%. The rate of installation of cables requires to be increased to meet planned completion dates. The impact of this delay is significant as it affects all completion works throughout the vessel. The yard are working on a recovery plan, said the CMAL commentary. Other issues included delivery, completion and accuracy of production drawings, availability of experienced supervisors, shortage of tradespeople, availability of commissioning engineers, and availability of materials. Another key challenge was the commissioning of the LNG system. A failure to order sensors that are part of the fuel safety system that allows Glenasanics to operate means that if and when it is brought into service, it will not initially run on LNG. It will be operating on a diesel single fuel system for at least the first 9 months of its service. Both Glenasanics and Hull 802 were hailed as a step towards a greener future for Scotland's state-owned Calmac ferry fleet, as they were to be the first UK-built ships capable of running off LNG and marine gas oil. LNG was seen as significantly cleaner and would help to reduce emissions to meet ambitious Scottish Government targets. A Scottish Government update on progress has revealed that a series of regular calls has been put in place between the Deputy First Minister John Swinney and Ferguson Marine. This article is by Martin Williams.
Recorded from the Herald on the 18th of January 2023. From the sports section, recorded by Amy. St Johnstone released statement after fan hostility over Rangers tie, by David Irvin. St Johnstone have released a statement in response to fan outrage over controversial Scottish Cup tie against Rangers. An update shared on the club website cited a huge amount of negativity and hostility from valued fans over the upcoming McDermott Park encounter. The Perth club had come under fire from supporters after tickets were priced at £30 for adults, with Rangers handed a 3-stand allocation for the match. This move means hundreds of season ticket holders will be moved to accommodate the increased away allocation. Adults are being charged £30 for the match, while concessions are priced at £20. St Johnstone have since announced that 600 under-12s will be given free access to the match if accompanied by a paying adult. A section of St Johnstone supporters complained to the club over the decision and were emailed back correspondence citing VAR and policing costs among reasons for the inflated entry fee and limited home tickets. The club could see a record low number of home supporters at the Cup tie on Saturday, with a number of supporters set to boycott the match over the club's decisions. A banner emerged yesterday at the club stadium with the words "Silence is talking," taking aim at the lack of public communication over the fan outrage. Now St Johnstone chairman Steve Brown has released a statement on the matter and insisted the decisions were taken with the best interests of the club at heart. However, the update does accept the decision of fans who choose not to attend the match on Saturday. As this section read, "We totally understand the frustration our supporters feel and their level of disappointment." The statement also admits certain criticisms levelled against the decisions have merit, with the club vowing to take feedback into consideration going forward. A statement signed by the club chairman read, "The seating arrangements and pricing for the forthcoming Scottish Cup tie against Rangers has been met with a huge amount of negativity and hostility from a number of our valued fans. The club has endeavoured to respond to the various communications sent to the club both by way of email and telephone over the last fortnight, and the club is aware of the views of various sections of fans both from social media activity and press reports. The decision made in respect of this cup tie were taken with the best interests of the club at heart. However, we totally understand the frustration our supporters feel and their levels of disappointment. On reflection, the club accepts that certain criticisms levelled against the decisions have merit, and going forward the club will take this feedback into account in considering both pricing and seating arrangements in future fixtures. Our supporters can be absolutely assured of this. Whilst we hope to see as many of our supporters as possible inside McDermott Park on Saturday to support Callum and the players in this important cup tie against Rangers, we understand and respect our supporters who choose not to attend on this occasion." Fan group The Fair City Unity took part in a silent protest against the announcement during Saints' home match with Dundee United. And in a further statement, the group confirmed they would continue to fight for fair and affordable ticket pricing. They said on Monday, 2nd of January 2023, against Dundee United, Fair City Unity demonstrated against the recent announcement of ticket allocation and pricing ahead of the club's first home Scottish Cup fixture since winning the competitions in 2021. The group was made aware of the club's decision prior to the announcement being made public, strongly rejecting the decision and highlighting the backlash envisaged from across the support which has come to fruition. For the first half of the match, the group participated in a silent protest along with leaving our traditional section empty, encouraging other fans who also congregate in the area to do likewise and support our action. With acknowledgement from the club, the group has in recent times supported the local community during the current cost of living crisis and will continue to do so. Therefore, as a group, we are disappointed in the £30, £20 ticket pricing structure and direct blame at both St Johnstone Football Club and Rangers Football Club, who had an opportunity to make the match affordable for all fans, particularly due to the current cost of living crisis, and also to compensate the unwanted kick-off time and TV coverage. The group will continue to fight for fair and affordable ticket pricing structures at all St Johnstone matches in order to make football affordable for all fans. That article was by David Irvin.
From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday the 18th of January 2023, from the Voices section, Agenda, Putting Local Communities at the Heart of Land Ownership, by Callum MacLeod. Last year was a pivotal one in the debate around Scotland's land ownership and management. In November, a 2-year-long process was completed when the community group the Langholm Initiative acquired 10,500 acres of moorland in Dumfries and Galloway. The £6 million raised to acquire this land was sourced through crowdfunding and private donations. The Langholm Initiative aims to create one of Scotland's largest nature reserves to help tackle climate change, environmental preservation, and boost community regeneration. I am privileged to have advised the Langholm Initiative in the process required to take ownership of the land. It is one of 30 community groups we have supported in our acquisition of 25,000 acres of land. Coming from a Skye crofting community, not only is it hugely significant to me personally, but it's important to appreciate what the land can give us when it comes to our livelihoods when properly managed and respected. This comes against the backdrop of communities feeling pushed out of the increasingly fast-moving market for rural land, which investors are moving in on in search of natural capital opportunities. The Scottish Government has carried out a wide-ranging consultation ahead of the proposed Land Reform Bill. Underpinning this consultation was the role of community involvement when it comes to land ownership and management. In particular, the proposals would inject a public interest test for the transfer of any large-scale land holdings. It also requires any landowner to notify community bodies of their intention to sell. The legislation is intended to address concerns about the highly concentrated pattern of land ownership in rural areas of Scotland and ensure greater benefits to communities and the environment. There is a growing movement towards self-increased transparency allowing land and asset ownership in Scotland. Land values have increased significantly in recent years, partly due to the increase in activity for forestry and land associated with carbon offsetting. Scotland's natural capital presents opportunities, and it is easy to dismiss these as being solely at the discretion and benefit of larger estates or landowners. The Scottish Government's approach to ensure all communities can benefit. Our natural capital can benefit us all through community ownership, whether that is the huge contribution it plays in our efforts to achieve net zero, or to help reverse depopulation by creating jobs and affordable housing. Those benefits are long-term, but we have a responsibility to both protect and harness one of our most valuable natural assets for future generations. The latest Scottish Government statistics indicate that the number of assets owned by community groups is increasing. In 2021, the number of assets owned by community groups, primarily land and buildings, increased by 48 to 711. Those 711 assets were owned by 484 groups and covered 212,000 hectares. When you consider that Scotland covers 7.8 million hectares, community ownership represents a mere 2.7%. According to the Scottish Government's national indicators, this is considered a success. 2022 continues to show that land reform is a journey rather than an event, and I would suggest we still have a long way to go. And that piece was by Callum MacLeod, who is a partner in the rural land team at law firm Harper MacLeod.
Herald Scotland recorded on Thursday 19th of January 2023, Arts and Entertainments, Books, New Release, A Gripping Tale of Secrets and Lies by Andrea Mara, by Alistair Mabbitt. Hide and Seek, Andrea Mara, Penguin, £8.99. In Joanna Stedman's position, most of us would probably react in a similar way. I mean, if you found out that the house she just moved into had once been a home of a 3-year-old girl who vanished without a trace more than 30 years earlier, you might indulge in a bit of amateur detective work yourself, or at least bone up on the subject with a true crime podcast or two. Having just given up her job to be a full-time mother and moved to the Dublin suburb of Roundbrook to be near her husband's parents, Joanna has time to learn about the case, but she's driven by more than mere curiosity. For Joanna's background is a web of lies and guilt she'd kept secret from everyone, including her husband, and the case of the missing presumed drowned Lily Murphy striked uncomfortably close to home. Because if Lily drowned, her body swept away by a river's current in 1985, then who was the girl adopted into Joanna's family who resembled her so closely, the little sister that Joanna, wait for it, killed? Leaving aside the bombshell that our narrator admits to killing a member of her own family, the same little girl clearly can have died twice. It's hard to know how to feel about Joanna after that startling confession, but Mara's premise is so intriguing it can't fail to keep you reading right to the end. We don't know at first how the young Joanna caused the death of Lila, the girl she was told was her sister, but it's a dark, shocking secret, a terrible burden to have carried all her life. And not only has Joanna never told anyone about Lila, she's fabricated a childhood with rich but remote parents who were killed in a fire to cover up her true origins. Now convinced that Lily didn't die, but was somehow spirited away from her real parents and adopted by her own mother, Joanna starts to make inquiries about her disappearance, and it turns out that many of the people who were there that day are still living in Roundbrook. Lily's parents, the glamorous Californian emigre Mary and her Irish husband Robbie, are both long gone, but those who remain include Joanna's snooty in-laws and Fran and Cora, who were children at the time and saw Lily on the day she disappeared. Joanna craves answers, and it's a wonder no one tells her to shut up about Lily Murphy as she bombards her new neighbours with questions and keeps them posted about her inquiries. Her obsession with getting to the bottom of the biggest mystery of her own life involves raking up painful memories and winkling out the domestic secrets of a community she's only just joined, and the residents of Roundbrook are, it has to be said, surprisingly tolerant of her. Such minor reservations aside, Mara fully delivers on her gripping premise. Nothing is what at first appears, and switching between Joanna's first-person narration in 2018 and the events of 1985, she gradually peels away the layers of secrecy surrounding Lily's disappearance to show not only what had happened to her that fateful day by the river, but also how it connects to the trauma of Joanna's childhood. Inspired by the very real terror of briefly thinking her son had gone missing, Mara has injected a note of darkness and dread into her story, and is so well paced and thought through that this masterfully constructed mystery can even hold back a couple of sucker punches until the very last page. But Alistair Mabbitt, Herald Scotland, recorded on Wednesday, 18th of January 2023, Arts and Entertainments. Row erupts over BBC Scotland plan to axe music programmes, by Barry Didcock, Senior Features Writer. Leading Scots musicians have condemned BBC Scotland's decision to axe key programmes covering and promoting jazz, classical and traditional music. In an open letter coordinated by Tommy Smith, saxophonist and head of jazz at Glasgow's Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, Tommy Smith warned that the broadcaster was damaging his reputation and said the cuts would be devastating. The threatened shows are Classics Unwrapped, Pipeline Jazz Nights, presented respectively by Jamie McDougall, Gary West and Seanich Aiken, a 2022 Scottish Album of the Year SAY award nominee. Among the signatories to the open letter are world-famous violinist and incoming director of the Edinburgh International Festival, Nicola Benedetti, composer Sir James Macmillan, Scottish opera director Alex Reedike, Scotland's Macker Kathleen Jamie, and jazz pianist Fergus McCready, a recent Mercury Music Prize nominee and winner of last year's prestigious SAY Award. "We must fight to save this and the other shows," says Sir James Macmillan. "The BBC is renowned the world over for its support of culture and the arts. Why is BBC Scotland abandoning this vital activity and damaging its own reputation?" Ms Benedetti has said she's shocked and deeply disappointed by the broadcaster's decision, while Mr Smith accuses the BBC of abandoning jazz at a time when musicians such as Fergus McCready and Georgia Cecile are putting Scottish jazz on the European map. Now is the time to expand jazz in Radio Scotland, not cut its head off and make invisible a music which is flourishing in Scotland, he said. Why now, when we have so many remarkable young jazz artists from the Royal Conservatoire, emerging musicians who require an outlet for their music? It certainly can't be an economic choice, as the budget is microscopic compared to other genres. The petition to save the shows currently has just under 5,000 signatures. Meanwhile, the BBC insists it is still committed to music programming across the network, pointing to unaffected shows such as Another County, Travelling Folk, Take the Floor and The Key Sessions. By Barry Didcock.
The Herald, Thursday the 19th of January 2023. News. Steep fall in number of people in hospital with flu. This article is by Helen McCardle. The number of people in hospital with flu has halved since mid-December as rates of the infection across Scotland continue to fall. Surveillance indicates that influenza incidence is moderate in most parts of Scotland, but low in the Lothian and Borders region. By the first week of January, there were 720 patients in hospital who had tested positive for influenza, compared to a peak of 1,450 in the week running up to Christmas Day. A steep resurgence in flu for the first time since the pandemic began has been blamed for piling pressure on hospitals, which were already struggling with bed shortages. According to Public Health Scotland, the extraordinary flu rates in December were higher than any of the 12 winters prior to 2022-23 and roughly double the peak seen during the 2017-18 winter, which had been considered a particularly bad flu season. In the week ending December the 25th, 2022, there were a total of 2,727 laboratory confirmed influenza cases in Scotland. This fell to 1,363 in the first week of January and has declined to 452 in the week ending January the 15th. The number of admissions for patients testing positive for respiratory syncytial virus, RSV, has also fallen from a peak of 234 admissions in the week ending December the 4th to 136 admissions in the first week of January. Overall rates of RSV in the community are now estimated to be low and baseline among children under 5. Rates of other respiratory viruses are also falling, including HMPV, which is now at low levels. The number of patients in hospital with COVID has also fallen from a recent peak of 1,348 on January the 2nd to 1,036 on January the 15th. This article is by Helen McCardle.
The Herald on the 20th of January and the Voices section. Cost of living crisis is hitting the world's most vulnerable children. On a recent visit to Turkana in northern Kenya, I witnessed the devastating impact of the country's worst drought in 40 years. Families are hungry, precious livestock is dying, and water can scarcely be found. I met many anxious parents and heard many heartbreaking stories, and yet there is hope in the form of Mary's Meals. We have served our nutritionist meals in nursery schools in Turkana since 2005. Last year, we were able to expand to reach those children's older siblings in more than 170 primary schools in the area. The promise of a plate full of beans and maize at school means that these little ones don't have to work to survive. Instead, they are attracted into the classroom where they can learn with full stomachs. It's a wonderful thing that, in desperate times, a charity founded in a shed in Argyll is helping the world's most vulnerable children. Thanks to the kindness of people here in Scotland and across the rest of the UK, an incredible 2,429,182 children will eat our life-changing meals today. And yet, it's getting more and more difficult for us to deliver our programmes. The cost for us to feed children has risen by 20% due to significant increases in the price of commodities such as grain, fuel and fertiliser. This means the cost to feed a child with Mary's Meals for a school year has increased from £15.90 to £19.15. This will be a challenging year for our charity, with the escalating cost of living causing much pain for both those who support our work and the children who rely on Mary's Meals. Quite simply, our income is not growing at the same rate as the cost of feeding children. As I look ahead, I'm inspired by a conversation I had with Francis, a father I met in Turkana. He wants his children to gain an education so they can grow up to lift the family out of poverty it has endured for generations. Francis told me if we didn't have Mary's Meals, the children wouldn't be able to learn and go to primary school. I didn't have the opportunity to go to school, but my daughter Josephine can, and she can make a change. It's so important. Josephine, at 4 years old, was too shy to say much, but her smile as she headed off to class said it all, as did her T-shirt, which read, "Never underestimate the power of women and girls." It fills me with hope to think that despite all the odds, children like Josephine can dream of a brighter future, fueled by our daily school meals. If you can give any amount to support our work today, please know that this will be received with deep gratitude. Until January 31, donations to Mary's Meals are being doubled by a group of generous donors, with up to £1.5 million of match funding available. To find out more, please visit marysmeals.org.uk. Karen Gray is Director of Communications at Mary's Meals. The Herald on the 20th of January and the Voices section. Greens have transformed Scottish politics, but for better or worse, by Adam McIver. In the sporting world, we often ask who is the greatest of all time. Take boxing, for instance. It's common to look straight to the blue-ribbon heavyweight division for the answer. Rocky Marciano, Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson. But to find the greatest of all time in boxing, we need to look beyond the heavyweights. Who is the pound for pound greatest? Perhaps it's one of the Sugar Rays, Leonard or Robinson, or Roberto Duran, or Marvin Hagler, or Floyd Mayweather. In Scotland's political ring, it's easy to instantly pick the SNP as the greatest of all time. They have been the dominant force for nearly 20 years, and there's no sign of that changing anytime soon. But what about the pound-for-pound greatest? Which party has used its MSPs to the greatest effect and with the greatest impact? Not the Tories, the only party never to have been in government. Not Labour, although there are signs of a comeback. There will be voters at the next Scottish election who weren't born when the party was last in power. And not the Lib Dems, who are stubbornly stuck. No, there is only one entrant in the pound-for-pound category, and that is the Scottish Greens. I would not expect the Greens to see me as an ideological bedfellow. For starters, I'm a capitalist. I think that capitalism is one of the world's great inventions. It grows the size of the pie in order that everyone, rich and poor, can get a larger slice. It's been proven to be a very effective method of ensuring that those at the bottom are able to make their way nearer to the top, and of protecting them if they are unable to do so. It has opened up the world, and the economic freedom it promotes goes hand in hand with political freedom. We know what the alternative to capitalism looks like. We've seen poverty, persecution and death behind the Iron Curtain, and we will see it still in Cuba and Venezuela. If they were allowed to access the internet, you could ask the people of communist North Korea, imprisoned and poor, isolated and persecuted, how they feel about their brethren in capitalist South Korea, living a decade longer than them. So system change, as campaigners call it, is not for me. I'm a fully signed up member of the Capitalist Club. I'm also part, professionally and personally, of an action not words environmentalist movement which is based on helping the public, private and voluntary sector achieve net zero quickly but sustainably, while still making the profits they need to make to keep their staff in jobs, reinvest and keep contributing taxes to the country's coffers. I don't believe the answer to the climate crisis is to stop the world and get off. I believe the answer is to change the world so we can stay on. Scotland's Greens would not invite someone with my beliefs to break bread with them, but I cannot possibly argue with their success. If we look at the Scottish public policy over the last couple of years, the Greens convey the impression of having 28 or 38 or 58 MSPs, rather than the 8 that they returned in 2021. There are myriad reasons why the SNP decided to bring the Greens into government after Labour's Jackie Bailey's win in Dumbarton deprived the party of a majority, too complex to go into there. Whatever those reasons, though, it was difficult to imagine that the impact the decision would have, well beyond the boundaries of the cooperation agreement the parties signed. The Greens deftly and cleverly have identified areas where the SNP was dipping its toe in the water and shoved them head first into the deep end. Take housing, for instance. The crackdown on the private rented sector has been toyed with by the SNP toward the end of the last parliament. It has now been supercharged. A centuries-old shibboleth of the far left, as Marx said, the landlords love to reap what they never sowed. Government policy is now having its desired effect, as flat owners envisage big losses ahead and sell up. The impact, which many fear will be a reduction in the already short supply of housing, is less important than the action. Or take oil and gas. Practically everyone in Scotland is signed up to the transition from fossil fuels to renewables. The potential of offshore wind and tidal energy, in particular, is effectively limitless, and Scotland has an exciting future as a global hydrogen hub. The SNP flirted with a presumption against new oil and gas exploration, and the Greens turned up the volume. Most in the industry acknowledge that they need time and investment to reach the renewable potential, and wish to retain both the income and the energy from domestic fossil fuels while they do, rather than having to import the black stuff from other, often less desirable parts of the world. But the impact is less important than the action. Scotland's road infrastructure is dismal by international comparison. This is not the fault of the SNP. We have suffered from decades of underinvestment by all parties, with too much capital being sucked by the southeast of England. As well as being unsafe, our trunk roads are slow and congested, which creates frustrating and needless carbon emissions. But the previous SNP government's ambitious plans for upgrading the trunk road network have been, to put it mildly, watered down. Many fear higher emissions as well as loss of investment and growth, and therefore a loss of tax income. But the impact is less important than the action. A happy ending for the Greens is not assured. Many of the voters may have a degree of buyer's remorse. They may feel they didn't really know what they were voting for. Nonetheless, any of those voters who are lost may well be replaced, and then some, by SNP voters who look at the Greens and see in them what they want to see in the more centrist SNP. The future is never certain, but the current is. And in the current, in terms of political impact, Greens mean racist. That's by Andy McIver.
The Herald, Friday the 20th of January 2023. News. Latest independence poll puts support for yes on 54%. This article is by Andrew Learmonth. Scotland remains split over the Constitution after two polls predicted completely different outcomes at any future independence referendum. Early on Friday, a Survation survey for True North found that 54% would vote no, with 46% backing yes. Professor Sir John Curtis said that poll seemed to show that a spike in support of independence when a slew of surveys put yes ahead following last November's Supreme Court verdict had proven to be temporary. However, just hours later, a Find Out Now poll for the National found that 54% of Scots would vote yes and 46% would vote no. The fieldwork for the first poll was carried out between January the 10th and 12th. However, the Find Out survey was carried out between January the 11th to the 18th, taking in Alistair Jack's decision to veto Holyrood's gender recognition reform bill. Professor Curtis told the National it was too soon to say whether the Section 35 row had any impact on voting intentions. He said there isn't any evidence here that there is any clear indication that the GRR row has pushed support for independence up any higher. What it does do is suggest that maybe we can doubt whether or not the impact of the Supreme Court judgment has dissipated in the way that some other polls have suggested. The SNP's Rona Mackay said the pro-independence papers poll showed that people in Scotland have had enough of opposition parties, Trump-like denial of Scottish democracy, and the damage caused by ever-tightening Westminster control. Scottish Greens MSP Ross Greer said it was no surprise more Scots than ever were backing independence. He said Westminster is running roughshod over the Scottish Parliament, overturning legislation passed by a supermajority of MSPs and openly boasting about the contempt they hold for Scottish democracy, the UK and beyond. This article is by Andrew Learmonth. The Herald, Monday the 23rd of January 2023. News. Scotland tourism. Ireland named among best in Europe to escape crowds. This article is by Craig Williams. A Scottish island has been named among the best in Europe for getting away from almost everyone. The 10-strong list was drawn up by CNN Travel to highlight lesser-known islands that offer visitors the chance to ditch the crowds and get closer to nature. The list features islands such as Alisudi in Sicily, Rathlin Island in Northern Ireland, Flores Island in the Azores, Heimaey in Iceland and Norðtoftanen in Norway. Joining them as a unique Scottish entry on the list is Tiree, which CNN Travel describes as a turquoise paradise off the western coast of Scotland. About Tiree, CNN Travel wrote, "One look at the turquoise and deep sapphire waters and perfect surf waves rolling onto its shores, and it's clear why the Isle of Tiree is sometimes referred to as the Hawaii of the North." The most westerly island in the Inner Hebrides archipelago, off mainland Scotland's west coast, 12-mile-long Tiree is known for its mild climate, clean air and beautiful white sand beaches that could easily be mistaken for the Caribbean in photos, if not in person. August water temperatures are in the brisk upper 50s Fahrenheit, or about 14 Celsius. Intrepid surfers know Tiree for its uncrowded beach breaks, and the 8-room Reef Inn caters to the board riding crowd. The annual Tiree Music Festival draws up to 2,000 attendees every July for a Scottish folk music extravaganza, but you'll most often have the island's mostly flat walking and cycling trails and 46 miles of gorgeous beaches to yourself. Visitors arrive on Tiree via 4-hour ferry rides from Oban or flights from Oban or Glasgow on Loganair. This article is by Craig Williams.
From the Herald, Sunday the 22nd of January 2023, Sports section. Andy Murray determined to rise up the rankings after Australian Open. From Sports Online. Andy Murray will make improving his rankings the priority over the next few months in the hope of avoiding the sort of gruelling schedule that compromised his Australian Open hopes. The Scot was at least able to put his blistered feet up on Sunday after his hope of a deep run in the Melbourne ended with a 4-set loss to Roberto Bautista Agut. Murray outperformed expectations again by pushing his Spanish opponent in a 3-hour, 29-minute contest, meaning he had spent more than 14 hours in court in 3 matches. The 35-year-old rightly earned plaudits for his efforts, not least his comeback to beat Thanasi Kokkinakis after 4 a.m, but he has higher expectations in bowing out in the last 32 at Grand Slams, and knows to give himself a chance, he must not expend so much energy in the early rounds. Murray will be ranked just outside the top 60 following this tournament, and will certainly hope to be in the top 32 by Wimbledon, which would earn him a seeding at the All England Club, and avoid a first-round draw against the likes of Matteo Berrettini as he experienced here. The good news for Murray is that his hard work in the off-season paid off in terms of his physical sharpness and confidence in the game. "I think my movement here was really good," he said. "That's something that at times hasn't been great the last 12 to 18 months. It's really important for me. When I move well, it allows me to play the game style that is most effective for me. I finished a lot of points up at the net during this event, which was really positive. Someone sent me a screen grab. I think of all the players that were playing, I'd finished the most amount of points up at the net and finished a lot of points with winners." Murray is always going to err on the side of being a defensive player, but being able to come forward and shorten points will be crucial to his hopes of trying to reach the later stages of these events again. He will prioritise rest and recuperation after travelling back to the UK, but expects to be fit for his next tournament in Rotterdam, beginning on February the 13th. "I don't have an injury, which is good," said Murray, who struggled with his feet and lower back against Bautista Agut. "My body obviously has had a lot of load and stress go through it in these last few days. I'll take a bit of time to recover. But because of the Davis Cup week, Rotterdam would start 3 weeks on Monday, so that should be more than enough time for me to recover, I would think. When Murray returns to Melbourne Park next year, he will hope to see changes to the schedule to reduce the chances of players competing into the early hours. The Scots' travails have focused attention on the issue, which is far from a new problem in tennis. Murray suggested having only 2 matches in the day session to reduce the chance of it overrunning, and beginning the night session earlier as relatively minor changes that really could help. Collective action is not one of tennis's strong points, and if Novak Djokovic Professional Tennis Players Association is to make an impact, this is the sort of thing it could start with. Having been largely anonymous since its launch at the US Open in 2020, the PTPA has stepped up its profile at Melbourne Park, naming a committee of 8 players. Djokovic, who is among the 8, said of late night scheduling, it comes down to what the TV broadcasters want to have. That's the ultimate decision maker. I would agree with Murray's points. For the crowd, it's entertaining. It's exciting to have matches at midnight, 1, 2, 3 a.m. But for us, it's really grueling. Even if you go through and win, prevail in these kind of matches, you still have to come back. You have your sleeping cycle, rhythm disrupted completely. Not enough time really to recover for another 5-setter. Something needs to be addressed, I guess, in terms of the schedule after what we've seen this year. This is from Sports Online from the Herald. From the Herald, Monday the 23rd of January 2023. Sports section. Darvel boss not listening to the Aberdeen claim he keeps hearing. By Liam Bryce. Mick Kennedy took his seat at Tynecastle to watch Aberdeen capitulate in spectacular fashion last week. He could probably have predicted what would follow. You'll never have a better chance against them. It doesn't stand to reason that a trip to the claustrophobic surroundings of Recreation Park for a Monday night Scottish Cup tie against 6th-tier Darvel has the potential for further Don's embarrassment. But their manager does not quite view it that way. Instead, Kennedy sees a side who pushed Rangers all the way at Hampden a week ago and whose 5-0 hammering against Hearts was not entirely reflective of the 90 minutes. I'm not reading too much into it, he said. If we were both Premiership clubs, but given where we are in the pyramid system, I'm not sure it's going to have a significant bearing on the match, to be honest with you. I know they're going through a difficult period, but I thought they played very well at Hampden. I was at the Hearts game in midweek, and I actually thought the game was very even for large parts of it. It was never a 5-0 game. You've got to hope there's a degree of complacency somewhere, but I'm sure Jim and his staff will be really driving the message that they need a strong, dominant performance. There's different dynamics for Aberdeen, but we need to focus on what we're good at, what we've worked on. It'll be a real challenge. Loads of people are saying you'll never get a better chance. But listen, it's easy to judge these guys when you're sitting in the house on the couch. You have to respect their level and the quality they have in their group. They're still a very strong Premiership team. There's utmost respect from myself, the staff and the players. Sitting top of the league, Darvel are drilled to play front foot, possession-based football, and Kennedy has no plans to change that approach this evening. He accepts there will be periods where his players will have to dig in, perhaps even suffer a bit, but contends that a wholesale change in how they operate would create more problems than it would solve. They do, after all, have a squad packed with SPFL experience in the likes of Ian McShane, Daryl Meggett, Jordan Kirkpatrick. I think the challenge for our players and staff is we need to try and implement our game as much as we possibly can. Obviously, there's an increase in the opposition's quality and fitness, so that brings its own challenges. If we're going to have any chance in the game, we need to stick to our beliefs, like we do every week. Anyone who comes and watches us or knows how we play will tell you it's very much possession-based football, keeping the ball at all times. That's the philosophy. That's how we work and train week in, week out. I think to navigate too far away from that would cause us problems. Listen, the games might naturally turn into that. We might need to defend our own box and be a lot deeper than what I would anticipate. But in the main, we need to try and impose ourselves on the game. That might not come to fruition depending on how the game develops. Most people, or people who don't know me, would assume that we will try and be compact, try and stay in the game, or keep the score down, maybe catch them on the break with a set piece. But the reality is, I don't think we have the players to do that. We're better trying to stick in what the game plan is week in and week out. It could make for a highly entertaining evening, especially if Aberdeen fail to treat the occasion with the respect it deserves. And that ultimately is what it's all about for this tiny Ayrshire town, a monumental occasion. The PBC cameras are set to descend along a level of media presence the club will have never seen before. Aberdeen will know such resources are not deployed in hope of a routine victory for an overwhelming favourite. Whatever happens though, Kennedy hopes the evening will come to be a significant milestone in the club's history as they strive towards the SPFL. In terms of where we've come from in such a short space of time, and our ambition to get into the senior leagues, which we've never hidden, part of that process was hoping we could get occasions like this, he said. We're playing arguably the third biggest club in the country, at home, in our second year in the competition. It's an unbelievable achievement. So for the town and the fans, it's something they would never have dreamt be possible. Everybody is looking forward to it. And for us, it can hopefully solidify that foundation to allow us to continue to progress as we've done the last few years. It's a massive occasion on many levels for us. That article was by Liam Bryce. From the Herald, Saturday, the 21st of January 2023, Sports section. More must be done to develop our own players, said Townsend, by Stuart Bathgate, senior sports writer. Gregor Townsend has admitted that Scotland have to do more to develop their own players after naming former England cap Rory McConaughey in his squad for the Six Nations. McConaughey, 31, qualifies under World Rugby's new rule, allowing players to switch allegiances to a second country for which they are eligible, if 3 years have elapsed since they last played for their first. He was born in England to Scottish parents and could make his debut for Townsend's team against his former side in the opening game in this year's championship at Twickenham a week on Saturday. Australian-born Jack Dempsey took the same route last year, playing for Scotland against the country of his birth, and Townsend's squad of 40 for the tournament includes Ben Healy, the Munster fly half, who has family connections with Scotland, but has come up through the Irish system. One of the most glaring deficiencies in recent years has been in the front row, with the likes of Pierre Schumann, W.P. Nell and Simon Bergham among those recruited from the Southern Hemisphere to represent their adoptive country. Scottish Rugby last week announced plans to address the shortage with the launch of a national programme called Scrum School. But Townsend knows that a lot more has to be done in order to give him and his successors as national coach greater selection options. We definitely have to produce and help our players come through better, he said. Myself and my role in the pro team as well, we need more choice and more difficult selections because there are more players coming through. It makes it easier to coach at international level if you're players who've come through your system. Ireland is a classic example of that. From a practical point of view, you can have more camps, more relationships, and they can be aligned with how the national team and the pro teams want to play. That would definitely be the goal. Dual qualifications is not simple. Players don't choose where they're born, and a lot of people move out of Scotland for various different reasons. It's always been a pool of talent we're able to connect with, because that's the nature of Scotland and its relationship with the rest of the UK for over 100 years. Players have always come from outside Scotland, but it would be great if we had more players coming through, which will improve our under-18s and our under-20s. Having voiced support for that ideal, and added that he definitely supported the idea of quotas for imported players in our pro teams, Townsend insisted he had to be pragmatic in making use of the rules as they stand. One of the teams we'll play in the World Cup is Tonga, and they're getting between half a dozen and a dozen players who are suddenly available to them by this route, he continued. You have to play within the rules, and my job is to evaluate whether it makes the team better and whether it helps us to win. You can't have any idealistic view on what would be better. These are the rules. At a time of year when many supporters naturally feel optimistic about their team's chances, coaches have to temper that sentiment with a dash of realism. But after an Autumn Nation series in which his team played their best rugby in their last game, a commanding 52-29 victory over Argentina, Townsend believes it is realistic for him to approach the championship in a hopeful frame of mind. I'm optimistic, definitely. I believe in this group of players and how they are playing. It's been a couple of months since we played, but I was very impressed with how they came together during November. I was impressed by how we played against New Zealand, a 31-23 defeat, which followed a 1-point loss to Australia, and a big win over Fiji, and then bounced back after a disappointing last quarter to play even better against Argentina. That gives me a lot of optimism that we can hit the ground running in a couple of weeks' time. The coach is also generally optimistic about a number of players, including Xander Fagerson, Hamish Watson, Duhan van der Merwe and Rory Darge, who are close to completing a return from injury. Glasgow tighthead Fagerson himself said on Friday night that he was on track to be available to play against England, and Townsend concurred with that prognosis. Nevertheless, given the importance of the position and the fact Fagerson has been a virtual ever-present in the starting lineup over the last 18 months, there could be an anxious wait before the Warriors prop gets the all clear. Let's see how it goes in the next 2 weeks in our squad, Townsend added. We believe he will be available for the England game, which is a big positive. That article was by Stuart Bathgate, senior sports writer.
Herald Scotland recorded on Wednesday 25th of January 2023. Arts and Entertainments. Glasgow Clutha helicopter tragedy survivor story made into film by Anne Fotheringham, senior features writer. A Glasgow film company is to produce a biopic of the Clutha helicopter tragedy after attracting international attention with an award-winning screenplay. Heel Films announced Mr. D, a Clutha survivor story, as its biggest short film project yet, and is now planning a fundraiser in Castlemilk to help with production costs. In November 2013, a police helicopter crashed into the Clutha bar, killing all 3 crew and 7 patrons of the pub and injuring 31 more. The film is the story of Jim Duncan, known as Mr. D, who was drinking at the city centre pub as part of a birthday celebration when the tragedy happened. Written by his daughter Susan Sims, it is based on the stories Jim told her in the aftermath of the accident. Heel Films founder Scott McMillan, who's from Clydebank, told her sister paper The Glasgow Times Susan wrote the script less than 6 months after her father sadly passed away in May 2018. The film will be a biopic based on stories that he told Susan numerous times of his eyewitness accounts of the night that tragically rocked Glasgow forever. The short film has been in planning since 2018 but was put on hold because of the pandemic. Scott and Susan worked together on another Heel Films project, The Bridge, in 2022. Over the course of the last few months, we've both received approval for the script by Alan Crossan at the Clutha Trust to make sure everything is in line with the ideals of the pub, charity and survivors of this tragedy, said Scott. The screenplay has also been entered into numerous film festivals around the world, and we're happy to announce it has won awards across the board. The screenplay picked up Best Short Script Awards at the Subhatra, Santa Dev, Lotus and Rohit International Film Festivals, and Best Drama Screenplay at the Sofia Art Film Awards. Heel Films is now hoping to raise funds to cover production costs, and also plans to hold a screening night at the Glasgow Film Theatre, GFT, with all proceeds going to the Clutha Trust. A comedy night will take place on February 25 at the Netherhome Community Centre in Castlemilk. Check Heel Films' Facebook page for more information. By Anne Fotheringham, Herald Scotland recorded on Friday 20th of January 2023. Arts and Entertainments. Kevin McKenna, Rescuing Burns from the Scottish Establishment, by Kevin McKenna. In the place where echoes of Robert Burns chime loudest, they won't be having a supper in his name this year. Instead, Ellisland Farm, tucked into the folds of rolling Dumfriesshire pastures on the banks of the River Nith, will host a Burns brunch in January 25. Joan McAlpine, Business Development Manager of the trust that runs Ellesland Farm, explains why. Like all culture, that which is formed around Burns changes and evolves. We'll serve haggis, neeps and tatties, but it'll be for families and we'll hold it during the day. We'll have musicians and an immortal memory by a young person, simply to try to make it appeal to that younger generation, and we're doing away with the toast to the lassies in the reply. But a young Burns enthusiast will recite the rights of women for the lassies part, and she'll also sing The Ploughman, which is one of his famous songs that Burns wrote here. It's okay to depart from some of the Burns supper traditions. I've been to suppers where there's been a toast to Scotland and a toast to the tune, and where steak pies were served up. We want to create something that will appeal to children and young people. Ms McAlpine's main task is to make this farm the primary destination for Robert Burns aficionados and those who are merely curious about the life of Scotland's most important and best loved cultural and artistic figure. A large part of this will involve introducing him to future generations. Robert Burns spent 3 years labouring to make this most unyielding of farms work. He finally quit it as a bad lot in 1791, yet these were 3 of his most productive years. During this time he created hundreds of songs and poems, including Tam O'Shanter, his majestic homage to the glory of human folly. All the while he laboured to find a tune from an unyielding farm while traversing these glens as an exciseman. It's also where he'd found the domestic happiness he'd longed for, even while he was being feted in Edinburgh high society at the height of his rock star fame. This is where he finally made a home and had a family with his beloved Jean Armour. And it's this measure of contentment amidst his own folk that perhaps inspired the torrent of music and verse that's enchanted the world ever since. Down by the river that drew him to this place, we retraced Burns's steps. It was on these daily walks that he began to devise the words and images of Tam O'Shanter, and over there in the fields beyond the Nith, he witnessed the scene which inspired what must be the world's first anti-blood sports poem. Encountering a hare which had been wounded by a huntsman's shotgun, he was overcome with outrage and pity, and so he wrote on seeing a wounded hare. Inhuman man, cursing thy barbarous art, and blasted by thy murder-aiming eye, may never pity soothe thee with a sigh, nor ever pleasure glad thy cruel heart. These verses are infused with the humanity for his fellow creatures, both man and beast, which characterised his finest work. McAlpine said, Burns was a really radical figure, yet much of his radicalism was removed from his memory by Victorian Scotland. It was during this time that he was more or less claimed by the establishment. It's why Hugh McDermott was absolutely scathing about Burns' suppers. He felt that the real essence of Burns, his values and what he genuinely cared about, had been captured and used by polite society for its own purposes. She feels that beyond the romanticism and his reputation as a womaniser who was no stranger to a bacchanal, Burns was a man of his time. Yet we also need to understand what a radical figure he was. He really valued people for who they were, no matter their status in society. He knew poverty himself, and he knew people who lived in poverty, and he really valued those people. And that's why I think people around the world have always saluted him. We talk a lot about diversity and heritage, and so we want more types of people to be involved in and connected with the work we're doing at Ellesland Farm. Burns' strength is that he appeals to people of all social classes, and his output in the Scots language means a lot to the people who speak that language. Robert Crawford's great biography of Burns looks at him dispassionately and discusses his faults and weaknesses, but he also explores the compromises that he had to make simply to survive and earn a living for his family. He had to be cute about how he framed his political and social views. Crawford discusses Scots Wha Hae, for centuries Scotland's unofficial anthem. This was written at the time of the French Revolution, and although Burns was a patriot with a keen interest in Scotland's history, his words conveyed the main themes of the French Revolution. At that time, though, as the great French social conflagration was unfolding, you could lose your job, or worse, if you were too overt about supporting it. McAlpine represented South Scotland at Holyrood for 10 years, and gained a reputation as one of the SNP's brightest and hardest working MSPs. After her defeat at the 2021 election, she could have taken her pick of lucrative jobs in the corporate sector, the route most favoured by retiring or resting politicians. Instead, she was delighted to take up the more modest post at the Ellesland Farm Trust. My passion for Burns began in 1990 when I saw Liz Lochhead's All Jock Tamson's Bairns and was transfixed by the music and wonderful singing of Rod Patterson and the Cold Blast Orchestra. It was just absolutely wonderful. Like so many other Scottish children, I'd learned many of Burns's songs without even knowing that they were written by him. Indeed, I suspect that many of us, when we first encountered the song by Robert Burns, might not have been aware that he had written it. They were a part of so many Scottish childhoods and family gatherings. At Holyrood, I led a couple of debates after Murray Pittock, the academic and historian, approached me. Murray wanted to produce a work in rural farms and the Scottish economy at Glasgow University. He felt the country was missing a trick in terms of the kind of soft power potential of what Burns could do for Scotland around the world, also as a way to showcase Scotland's natural food and drink produce and its tourism benefits. Heritage increases the sense of self-regard and community pride of the people who live adjacent to a great national asset. When local people come to know about Burns and all that he stood for, as well as his literary and artistic legacy, it gives them enormous pride. And I think this holds true for the whole of Scotland. The goodwill for Burns around the world is incredible, and this is reflected in the growth of Burns suppers across the world and in the most far-flung corners. As a result of that debate, Pittock and Glasgow University were given money by the Scottish Government's Economic Department to produce some work on Robert Burns and the Scottish economy. Ms McAlpine added, "It could be worth millions to the Scottish economy, and we could do so much more if we linked up all of our Burns sites and really marketed it as a national campaign. His works and his ideals resonate around the world, and I think we sometimes simply don't appreciate to what extent." She wants to put Ellisland Farm at the centre of this and has already raised more than £700,000 to improve the buildings, including the main one, which was built and designed by Burns himself. Future plans include holiday accommodation and what surely would become the most desirable and inspiring writers' retreat in Scotland. The little museum at Ellisland already houses some of Robert Burns' most sacred and treasured artefacts, including his flute, letters, manuscripts and the large iron stove, still working, used by Jean Armour. Ms McAlpine believes Burns would have been pleased at the idea of his memory inspiring new generations of writers and artists. The idea of the heaven-taught ploughman who bequeathed us the most beautiful songs and poetry and his ideas of working-class solidarity transfixes so many different peoples and cultures. By Kevin McKenna.
From the Herald, Tuesday the 24th of January 2023, from the news section. Lives on the line. Sharp rise in suspected drug deaths in Scotland. By David Ball. SNP ministers have been warned that inaction is putting lives on the line after new statistics revealed the number of suspected drug deaths in Scotland has risen. The figures from Public Health Scotland show that in October and November, the number of people killed from suspected drug use has seen a sharp increase following a previous downward trend. Public Health Scotland's Rapid Action Drugs Alert and Response (RADAR) quarterly report shows 109 people died from suspected drug use in November, higher than the same month in both 2021 (89) and 2020 (93). Figures for October were not included in the report. As a result of the rise in drug deaths in Scotland, SNP ministers pledged to publish suspected drug death statistics on a quarterly basis, with the most recent release in December showing a fall of 15% between July and September when compared to the previous quarter. Suspected drug deaths are reported based on Police Scotland management information and are not confirmed through toxicology. SNP Drugs Policy Minister Angela Constance extended her deepest sympathy to all those affected by the loss of a loved one through drugs. She added, although the suspected drugs deaths figures showed a 21% decrease for the first 9 months of last year, this latest report indicates a sharp increase in October and November. I am aware that this report uses management information provided by Police Scotland and is based on attending officers' observations and initial inquiries at the scene of death, but of course the numbers we are seeing are still far too high. We remain focused on our ongoing efforts to get more people into the form of treatment which works best for them. We are committed to delivering drug checking facilities in Scotland, which would enable us to respond faster to emerging trends, and we would anticipate that licence applications to the Home Office to grant permission for the establishment of these facilities in Glasgow, Dundee and Aberdeen will be submitted early this year. Scottish Labour drug spokesman Paul O'Kane warned there is no room for complacency in tackling drugs deaths. He added, "Every single one of these deaths was preventable, and each one is a tragedy. This is a national emergency, and the SNP needs to start treating it as one. Lives are on the line. The SNP must start acting with the urgency needed, starting by scrapping their dangerous plans to cut funding to vital drug and alcohol services." Radar also released an alert for emergency services and drug workers about a group of synthetic opioids known as nitazines, which have been discovered across the country and in prisons. The claim alerts most detections in Scotland were seen in fake oxycodone pills, sometimes stamped with an M or the number 30, while it has also been found in white paper form in prison seizures. The drug has been detected in Lothian, Grampian and Greater Glasgow and Clyde, according to Radar. Ms Constance said, "This data is published so services can respond quickly to what is happening on the ground. As a result of an increase in the availability of a new group of synthetic opioid drugs called nitazines, Public Health Scotland has issued an alert so drug and alcohol services, emergency services, healthcare services and high-risk settings are aware." A report from the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs last year suggested at least 24 deaths from nitazine substances in 2021, with the group suggesting the substances be considered Class A drugs. The alert said, "Due to their unexpected presence in the drug supply and high potency, nitazines pose a substantial risk of overdose, hospitalisation and death. PHS strongly recommends people do not take non-prescribed oxycodone tablets." That report was by David Ball. From the Herald, Tuesday the 24th of January 2023, from the opinion section. "Cake in the office is a joy, not a form of passive smoking," by Katrina Stewart. I was in a supermarket car park last week, and the woman in the Chelsea tractor next to me was taking a moment to light up a cigarette before reversing her SUV out of the space, which is fairly unremarkable, but for that she had a boy of about 8 years old in the seat next to her. It seemed a pretty retro sight. You'd think smoking in a confined space with children is a habit of a previous era, that the damaging effects of fag smoke on developing lungs are kent enough to know that you'd avoid it. But hey, at least she wasn't taking cake to a workplace. My boss had brought some little chocolate biscuit marshmallows into the office, and they're sitting seductively in an open box to my right. I started a fitness challenge today, how very January of me, and I'm trying very hard not to touch them. Professor Susan Jebb, chair of the Food Standards Agency, would say the editor is guilty of a sin akin to passive smoking. In an interview last week, speaking as herself and not as a representative for the FSA, she said that bringing cake to the office should be seen as being as harmful as passive smoking. I can say with some certainty that I'd take an Office Empire biscuit over somebody blowing a blueberry flavoured vape in my face any day. As an aside, can vapors please, dear God, stand downwind, or I don't know, exhale into a corner or something? Anyway, people take their treats seriously, not least cake. This is a nation with rituals based around cake, rituals with cake-based interludes, and TV franchises based on watching people fail at making cakes. So Professor Jebb's comments were controversial enough. I mean, we're at the point now of quoting Marie Antoinette non-ironically here, so it's serious times, that they made their headlines overseas. This is such stuff as dreams are made on if you're a health expert who's hit the right note. Professor Jebb, likely to some alarm, did not hit the right note, and folk were affronted enough that the story featured in Australian publications and the Washington Post. When I was at the Glasgow Times, we had an office cake club. It started out as a nice thing to do for one another. We'd take it in turns to bake a cake to be shared with the other members of the club. From a caring bit of cheer, the club became increasingly more competitive until the cakes were towering high, impressive confections. We ended up doing a competitive Victoria sponge bake judged by one of the lads off the Great British Bake Off. In an outrage that incenses me to this day, I came second. Before long, an anti-cake club was formed. They still made cakes and brought them in, but they were things like top hats and Rice Krispie cakes, no bake, easy recipe, a hipster 2 fingers to our earnest efforts. You have to be an absolute fun sponge to want to remove cake from offices. Or a public health expert faced with the reality that 2/3 of adults are overweight, including a quarter who are obese. 1/5 of children are already overweight by the time they start school, and most people in Britain are now too heavy by the age of 25. It's a tough subject to broach because of the natural sensitivity people feel about their weight. There's a fight back from body positivity movements, the considerations, for example, that arose when it was suggested all menus should come with calorie counts. The reality is, though, obesity puts a strain on an already strained health service, and the majority of people are not overweight through active choice. Professor Jebb also commented that the majority of doctors ignore patients' weight, likely because of the sensitivity involved and the complexity. It's very difficult to make any kind of blanket health guidance because you are really pitching your guidance to a specific minority while making it broad enough to try to relate to the majority. This ends up patronising some and offending others. See any forthcoming attempt from the Scottish Government to address alcohol marketing, a position that leads only to your health advice being ignored. Willpower is not the solution to tackling a large-scale public health issue. We live in an obesogenic society that makes it easy to be overweight, and we have to make the environment more supportive of good health. That's the point Professor Jebb was rightly making, but going after the communal French fancies was a foolish way to do it. Truly, when it comes to public health guidance, you cannot have your cake and eat it. This article was by Katrina Stewart. From the Herald, Tuesday the 24th of January 2023, from the news section. Jenner's fire. Edinburgh Council leader hopes building can be saved. By Jodie Harrison. Investigators are assessing damage to Edinburgh's iconic Jenner's building in the wake of a blaze which left 5 firefighters in hospital, one of them critically injured. The city's council leader, Cammy Day, said that he didn't have an answer to how severe the damage to the former department store was, and that structural surveys are underway. 4 fire engines remain at the site this morning, with the fire now extinguished. 1 firefighter remains in a critical condition after suffering injuries tackling the fire yesterday, which broke out in the rear of the building. 4 colleagues are also being treated in hospital, with injuries thought not to be as severe. Mr. Day said that his thoughts are with their families, and that a multi-agency investigation comprised of police, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and the local authority was underway into the cause of the blaze. A cordon remains around the site of the fire, although local businesses are returning to normal and disruption is being kept to a minimum. Mr. Day said that he was hopeful that the building, which is in the process of being turned into a hotel, could be saved. Speaking to BBC Radio Scotland this morning, he said, "That will be the subject to the surveys. Where we saw the fire yesterday was to the rear of the building, and I hope that it can be salvaged. There's 2 important things here: the safety of our emergency service workers and the iconic building, which we will try to save as much as possible, subject to the structural surveys that are happening as we speak. Witnesses saw one soot-covered firefighter being brought out of the burning building by two of their colleagues. After the fire started, emergency services shut roads around the building from which flames were seen coming out of the ground floor. A total of 22 appliances and other specialist resources were sent to the scene at the fire's height. Founded in 1838, the department store was one of the oldest in the world when it closed in 2021. The A-listed current building dates to 1895, after a fire destroyed the original. Renovations are ongoing to transform it into a hotel, backed by a firm owned by fashion billionaire Anders Hoch Povdelsen. This article was by Jodie Harrison.
The Herald on the 24th of January and the Arts and Ends section. Nevis Ensemble, charity bringing music to all, shuts by Martin Williams. An award-winning musical charity has shut after becoming the victim of a running cost crisis. The Nevis Ensemble, described as Scotland's street orchestra, whose vision was music for everyone everywhere, has confirmed that it has ceased operations, citing severe funding challenges. Since 2018, it has delivered hundreds of orchestral performances, as well as workshops and musician development sessions. It first burst into life in August 2018 with a plan to bring the therapeutic and community-strengthening value of high-quality live orchestral music of all genres to everyone in society. It has seen the ensemble performing everywhere from a farm in the Borders and supermarkets in Glasgow to the summit of Ben Nevis itself and the remote islands of St Kilda, whilst collaborating with organisations to run projects for those experiencing homelessness, women seeking refuge from domestic violence, children in care, young carers, older people living with dementia, and refugees. It said it was filling a gap that other arts organisations cannot fill. The charity said its decision was issued with the saddest of hearts and added, sadly, this is where the Nevis Ensemble story ends. Following severe funding challenges, Nevis Ensemble is no longer able to deliver its activities. The Board of Trustees would like to take this opportunity to thank the musicians and staff from over the years who have embraced the vision of Nevis Ensemble, and especially thank the many trusts, foundations, partners and individual donors who have made this journey possible. The Musicians' Union said it was deeply concerned. It said it was one of grave concern to members who are engaged by the organisation as fellows and to those who are engaged on a freelance basis, both of whom had their work with the organisation cancelled. MU Regional Organiser for Scotland and Northern Ireland, Caroline Sewell, said it was heavy news for the music sector in Scotland. She said this news comes as yet another blow for the music sector in Scotland, and in particular young and freelance working musicians, not to mention audiences across Scotland and beyond. In its last financial analysis for the year to March 2022, the charity received income of £174,350, nearly £40,000 more than the previous year, but its spending rose from £120,287 to £168,900. And trustees recognised that the principal risk which Nevis Ensemble faces was of a large variance and or failure in securing financial support, which would impact on the amount of activity the organisation can deliver and damage to the reputation of the orchestra. This was compounded by the COVID pandemic and the impact of Brexit. Another risk for the organisation was the loss of key staff, but it said it was a going concern. As a young organisation, the Board of Trustees is aware of the challenges the charity faces in securing financial support and stabilising the organisation's cash flow. With the organisation having garnered a positive reputation in its first 3 years of operations, the trustees are confident that in 2022-23 will allow the organisation to build and develop its practice. The charity had been hit by the resignation of Uchenna Nigwe as chair of the Board of Trustees, who had been expecting to develop and expand its activities over the coming years. They were expecting a replacement to be in place by April. The trustees said, in 5 short years, Nevis Ensemble has changed the narrative of what orchestras and classical music in general should be doing, in terms of inclusion, promoting new music, and sustainability. As a small organisation with a big heart, we are proud to have had an audience of almost 200,000 people across Scotland, as well as more than 1 million online during lockdown, and change the perceptions with musicians themselves on what they can do for our communities. In 2021, it was awarded the ISM Award for New Music in COVID Times for our project Lachlan Sketches, as well as the Environmental Sustainability Award at the Scottish Award for New Music for our groundbreaking work with the Scottish Classical Sustainability Group. Last year, it established a base in Easterhouse and began developing partnerships to ensure the most vulnerable and marginalised in society could access the benefits of music. That was by Martin Williams.
And that was this week's The Herald podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.